She popped her trunk and smiled like it was no big deal. My custom knee brace sitting there in the dark like a hostage, and she said I'd get it back after I learned to respect the rules. I was on the phone with 911 telling a stranger I was watching my own medical device get carried off, and yeah, that happened. I'd waited 6 months for that brace, fought insurance, did the slow, boring work of healing. And then at 11:15 on a bright, ordinary morning in Cedar Glen Meadows, outside Raleigh, the delivery truck finally rolled into our cul-de-sac, where every mailbox matches, and the grass looks cloned, and our HOA president, Brenda Collins, marched across my lawn with a clipboard like it was a badge. The same clipboard she'd used at 6:07 a.m. to knock on my door and pin a violation on me for an unauthorized delivery time frame before the delivery even existed. I came out with my cane and a smile because I wanted to start this day in good faith. I waved at the kid with the tablet. I told him I was the homeowner and the package was medical equipment. And Brenda slid between us and said, "Section 9B, freight-size deliveries require pre-approval." And the driver blinked. And I blinked because there is no world where a neighbor gets to confiscate your health like a library book. She angled the tablet away from my reach and told him she'd sign as community representative. She'd hold the box at the clubhouse until the proper forms were filed and a $200 rush fee was paid. And I said, steady as I could, "That's theft," and she said, with this laminated smile, enforcement. And then she waved the poor kid toward her SUV like she'd rehearsed it. And fear does weird things to people when a voice sounds like it's used to getting its way. So he set the box in her trunk while I was still on the phone with the dispatcher spelling my last name. The patrol car pulled up, and I handed over everything. The invoice, the insurance approval, the email that said out for delivery, and an officer asked if she knew it was medical, and I told him yes, she'd said it out loud. Then my inbox chimed with a note from Violations at Cedar Glen Meadows. Violations at Cedar Glen Meadows, org saying pool access, and the gym fob, and somehow trash pickup would be suspended until my fees were resolved. And I sat at my kitchen island and let the quiet feel heavy. The way quiet feels after someone crosses a line you thought everybody understood. My next-door neighbor Lila knocked at 12:17, holding her phone like a lifeline. Her Ring camera had caught Brenda opening the SUV and waving the driver over. The audio was clean, my voice on it saying, "That's my property." Brenda saying, "Respect the process," and we exported it. Sent it to my email and to a cloud folder and to the part of my brain that stops thinking you imagined things. Then I opened the HOA portal and found amendment draft. Section 9B time stamped yesterday. No vote, no notice. Just a loose weapon dressed up like policy. At 1:10, a detective named Sarah Martinez came by, hair in a low bun. Body cam blinking, and she didn't do the eyebrow dance or talk to me like I was making a scene. She just asked me to tell it straight in my own words, and I did no spice. Then she asked for the invoice and the insurance approval and the Ring video and the 6:07 a.m. violation notice that still felt like a prank. And she said, calm as a metronome, "Do not contact her if anyone from the board reaches out. Forward it to me if they threaten you while then." She added, almost like a footnote, that municipal trash can't be cut, and there's a line between policy and property, and taking the device crossed it. Around 4, the officer called to say they'd talked to Brenda, and she wasn't cooperative, which didn't surprise me. And at 2:19, the HOA announced an emergency session for 7 p.m. to address misinformation, which made me laugh. The short, sharp laugh you make when somebody sets your house on fire and tells you to stop being dramatic about the smoke. At 3:40, our Vice President Eric showed up with the energy of a man who apologizes for the weather. Stood on the edge of my doormat, like the floor was lava, and whispered that there was no 9B. Brenda had been waving draft language to scare people into compliance. He wasn't proud of staying quiet. And I believed him. The way you believe someone who knows they should have spoken sooner. He said, I should speak at the meeting, bring the video, and the invoice. He'd bring the printed bylaws. And if you've ever seen a system wobble from the inside, you know that look. By 6:40, Lila pulled up and drove me to the clubhouse. The room smelled like burnt coffee and permanent marker folding chairs in rows, projector humming on a cart. Like a substitute teacher was about to put on a documentary. Neighbors shuffled in groups. Some hungry for justice, some hungry for gossip, some carrying both in the same paper cup. And Brenda sat at the long table like a news anchor who expects to be believed navy blazer, decisive lipstick, the clipboard positioned like a crown. She banged the gavel at 7:03 and said we were there to address misinformation and inappropriate behavior directed at our HOA, and I stood with my cane planted and waited to be recognized because sometimes you let people have their little rituals so they can't say you disrespected the process. And then I told the room exactly what happened. The time, the trunk, the early morning violation for a delivery that didn't exist yet. The invoice, the insurance, and the fact that our bylaws said nothing about pre-approvals because Section 9B was a draft, not a rule, and Eric read the actual clause with his hands shaking. Deliveries are the responsibility of the resident, period. End of the only sentence that mattered. We played Lila's video on the projector. The audio crisp. The pictures too clean for denial, and the room went quiet, in a way that felt like someone had turned down the oxygen, and Brenda smoothed her blazer and said, Enforcement requires discretion. Standards are not a buffet. And I nodded, because law isn't a buffet either. And I said I didn't move here to be shaken down. While I was learning how to walk again, you know what I mean. And there was this tiny sound in the back row, a laugh someone tried to swallow. Eric asked if there was any written policy authorizing the board to seize residents' deliveries, and Brenda said drafts are working documents, and sometimes you have to act before disorder does, which is exactly the kind of sentence people use when they need to feel tall. And then the clubhouse door opened, and 2 uniformed officers stepped in, with Detective Martinez behind them. Steady eyes, steady voice. And she said, Collins, I need to speak with you about unlawful removal of medical equipment and interference with delivery. We have documentation, video statements, and internal communications that indicate intent. And that word, intent, hit the room harder than any gavel. Eric looked like he was going to pass out, but he found a page and said, voice small at first, and then brave motions to remove Brenda Collins as president, effective immediately for cause. Pending counsel, and hands went up slow and fast, some trembling, some defiant. Lila's went up like it had been spring, loaded for months. Mine too, even though my shoulder complained, and Brenda's eyes found mine, and there was a flash of tired, bewildered fury, like someone who'd worn a mask so long forgot there was skin under it, and the vote carried, and the gavel cracked the table, and the detective nodded to the officers and said, Collins, please come with us. And the room made that sound that is part relief and part fear, because justice feels like a cliff edge when you're standing close. I didn't cheer, gloat. I stood still and let the adrenaline leak out of my bones. And later that night, 2 officers carried my brace into my living room, and I signed for it, like the universe likes tidy paperwork. And I sat beside the box and ran my fingers along the tape and felt something softer than victory, maybe relief, maybe dignity, finding its way back into the room. People are going to argue about whether I escalated, whether calling the cops on a neighborhood dispute poured gasoline on a barbecue that could have been turned down with a garden hose, and I hear that I do. But sometimes the thing we call neighborly is just fear wearing nice shoes. And sometimes the only real difference between a rule and a power trip is whether there's a camera, a receipt, a timestamp, a line in the bylaws that doesn't say what someone needs it to say to win. Tomorrow, the pool will open at 7. The sprinklers will do their ballet. The willow leaf will post a recipe for sheet pan nachos. A kid will wobble off training wheels and skin a knee in a driveway. Brenda thought she owned. And maybe the only thing that actually changed is the name on a clipboard. Or maybe the change is quieter, and more important, maybe a room learned that standards without humanity are just costumes. So tell me straight. Was I right to bring the law into it, or would you have handled it? Over coffee and a handshake? Are HOAs a fence that keeps junkyards at bay, or a stage where small crowns get heavy? Where's the line between protecting property values and remembering people live inside the houses? Drop your. Take in the comments to tell me if you've seen an HOA overreach, or if you've served on a board and watched good intentions curdle hit. So this reaches the next person who needs to hear. They're not crazy for wanting their life back, and subscribe. If you want more true stories that smell like cut grass and a little smoke, the gavel already fell at Cedar Glen Meadows, but the argument is yours now. I'll be down there, reading.